Us today for our Diversity and Inclusion Committee, everyone. We are one of the first Diversity and Inclusion Committee within the associations. And am I mute?
You're
This
good.
within the association, sorry. And one of the first nationally committee. Our committee is growing since our committee has grown since. Thank you and welcome to our event partner, AREAA, LA Coastal, Ms. Cindy Tran, President, and Adam Barreto, Legislative Chairs. I will unmute them now and have them give a 1-minute speech. Ms. Tran?
I will.
Oh,
This is
you'll
Adam.
do it, Mr. Barreto? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll speak on behalf of AREAA. No, we're extremely happy and grateful to be a part of this great event today. And thank you so much, Julie, for introducing this to us and allowing us to be a part of it. Here at AREAA, we don't give long speeches, so I just want to say thank you and good morning, everyone.
Thank you. And our next partner is Women's Council of Realtors, South Bay, President Ms. Claudia Diaz, and President-elect Navlet Witt. Ms. Diaz, would you like to give a 1-minute speech?
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, it's an honor for Women's Council of South Bay to be here and collaborate with our local association. It's an honor for us to celebrate 83 years with Women's Council this year. We're the only women organization under the NAR umbrella. We are the 12th largest trade organization. We have 57% participation rate with RPAC. And also our membership includes of women and also 10% men. And we are well diverse. Our mission also is to promote education and also diversity and inclusion. And we thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ms. Diaz. Now, the time I would like to start off with the personal stories from 2 of our committee members. First, I will introduce Ms. Lourdes Everett. She is an all-around great gal. Welcome, Ms. Everett. Ms. Everett has been a realtor, has been in business since 1987. She's also a past president of South Bay Association of Realtors, 2005, and CAR director for 12 years. Ms. Everett?
Ben, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Ms. Everett?
Shall I go on?
Yes, please. Please
Okay,
go on.
great. Good morning. My name is Lourdes Everett. I became a member in 1987 when our building was the Torrance Lameda Carson Board of Realtors, later becoming the South Bay Association of Realtors. A Carson broker back in the day, many of my Carson colleagues believed in the concept of the Realtor organization. However, we felt the treatment was inequitable and biased back then. In 2005, I became the first person of color to serve as president of the South Bay Association of Realtors. My colleagues in Carson was proud to have their own become president. I made many visits to the offices, sharing valuable information and asking that they get involved. Convinced that time has changed, some did step up and actually volunteered. As much as we want to believe that time has changed with the passages of fair housing laws and the Rumford Act in the 1960s and the affirmative actions in 1970s and 1980s, that inequity and bias no longer exists. We cannot deny the fact that we are still struggling with these issues today. In our very own industry, we still have struggles in the subject of racism. My late husband, Terry Everett, was a Carson broker, a person of color, a Black man. We handled REO properties, and when he got listings in a predominantly minority area, other realtor members never questioned how he got that listing at all. However, when he was assigned a listing outside those boundaries, it never failed. He was always questioned by other realtors in that area and how he got that listing. One event comes to mind. He got a listing in the Hollywood Riviera. He held the brokers open. An agent from that area not only questioned how he got the listing. My husband was shocked by the treatment from this one agent. It was less than decent because he vented his frustrations when he got to the office. Same thing occurred when he had to do BPOs in those similar neighborhoods. Always a look of suspicion. So we decided I would do most of the BPO inspections in those areas. A woman was non-threatening, but a Black man was. My husband was a gentleman, a disabled Vietnam veteran who got his share of being pulled over by deputy sheriffs on a few occasions. He was made to lay on the ground in his suits. He was never retained. He was just harassed. At this point, we should know why. I'm a grandmother of 19. I have adult Black boys. I'm always afraid of my babies, or afraid for my babies, rather. To ensure their safety, as early as 10 years old, we had to educate them in how to conduct themselves when a police officer approached them, reminding them not to make any sudden moves, to always keep their hands on sight. I wish I can convey to you how I felt during the George Floyd killing.
Nothing to do with.
How frantic I was when my grandson was late coming home from work one night. I had to drive to his job so that I can follow him home to ensure he got home safely. That is the reality of brown and Black people. Even I am afraid when a police car is behind me. And I have family members who are in law enforcement. This committee was formed because we all saw George Floyd's killing on TV. We needed to air out our frustrations. Many of you were so touched that you made a commitment to get involved. You know, a solution will be slow to come, since racism has been in our US history for a very long time. It is a very sore and uncomfortable subject. However, I am hopeful. Dialogue is a beginning to finally understand the struggles we have experienced. I hope by listening, really listening, we can recognize our own bias and our attempt to repair it. Thank you very much for allowing me to share.
Thank you, Ms. Lourdes. Yeah, this is great. Our next speaker, who's going to give his personal story, is Mr. Reginald Ballard, the wellness realtor. Although he's relatively new to the industry, he brings a wealth of knowledge. Mr. Ballard, your turn.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Like Janet said, I am fairly new to the industry. My past, a little bit about my past. I have been in the post-secondary education industry for 12 years, a wellness professional for about 18 years. Everything, my life purpose is well-being and being well. So with that being said, I try to reflect that in everything I do about just being of service to people. My personal story starts kind of in the backyard. People say clean your backyard first before you can go out and clean anyone else's yard. So my first ledge day in Sacramento, a few of our colleagues, we were out, we had dinner, and we were just kind of lingering around, and I invited everyone back to my room so that we can finish conversation and, you know, vibing or whatever. And one of the realtors asked me, was I a realtor? And I felt that offensive because we were here for a realtor meeting and I had my pen on. So I asked him, what did he mean by that? And, you know, to make a long story short, I think it's conscious bias and unconscious bias that, you know, is shared with within our organization. So if we can become aware of what we're doing, or, the subtle microaggressions, or just blank being biased, because a way we were raised, people were raised or not versed in different cultures and understanding. And it starts right here. So that was one incident. Another incident, I was doing an open house in Hancock Park for a colleague, and a couple came by, and particular the female partner. She asked me a series of questions. She said that she goes to open houses all the time in the area, and she's never seen me here before. Where was my office? What was I doing here? So I stayed professional, and I continue to ask how I can be of service and focus on the features of the home and what she was looking for, or, how I can help her. But those are things that people of color, especially a Black man, African-American man, face daily, from driving down the street. If a police, is following me, it's always that in the back of my mind, are they going to pull me over and harass me for no reason other than the reason that the color of my skin? My point is, I think we can be most impactful as realtors is to educate ourselves about different cultures and how our behavior is towards everyone. If our mission and purpose is to serve, to empower people with purchasing homes or selling their homes, we need to be able to understand everyone and really work from a place of empathy and understand that just because a person didn't grow up in your neighborhood doesn't make that person bad. Because when you look at it that way, when things happen to you, I've seen, with media that people, white people in particular, they can get harassed by law enforcement as well, being overzealous. So have a place of empathy. If a wrong is happening, we need to correct it. We need to address it. We need to, in a professional way, where it doesn't happen to anyone, because that's just part of, life and how things should go. We should be that role model to stand up, and it should be by default that you are serving and being a good steward in whatever you do, or if you see injustice happening, or when you conduct your business wherever you are. So my point is, how we can be more impactful is to work on ourselves and our community as realtors to make sure that we are doing the right thing, and we don't have any microaggressions, or we're treating each other fair. Therefore, when you go out in the public, it's automatic by default. Or if you see the general public treating another realtor a different way, then they would treat you. It's your responsibility to step up and address it and educate that person and ask why. Why? That's why. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. Thank you. That's why this group was formed. We're here to share and to hold each other responsibly. Now I will turn it over to Ms. Novlet Witt.
Good morning, everyone. One of the things our next speaker wants us to understand is how our brains function naturally by instinct, and what we can do to overcome thoughts, behaviors, and reactions that happen sometimes without us even being aware of it, that we need and want to correct in ourselves. She will take the blame and judgment out of discussing our biases and give us, as individuals and in our companies, tools that we can use to outsmart our own unconscious bias. Valerie Alexander is a global recognized speaker on the topics of happiness in the workplace, the advancement of women, and unconscious bias. She's been studying the brain science behind instinctive behavior and bias triggers for more than a decade, going back to her first talk on the topic, how women can succeed in Hollywood despite female brains, having female brains, sorry. Valerie started her career as a corporate securities lawyer, investment banker, and internet executive in Silicon Valley, working on some of the biggest IPOs of the internet era, then transitioned into Hollywood, where she enjoyed success as a screenwriter and director. She's written several books on happiness, success, and the advancement of women, and in addition to traveling the world, both live and virtually, as keynote speaker, Valerie writes Christmas movies for the Hallmark Channel, which she knows you secretly love, even though you only admit it with your mom, watching it with your mom. Valerie and her husband live in Los Angeles with their ill-mannered German Shepherd, Vegas, baby. And without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Valerie Alexander.
Thank you, Navalette. The first house I ever bought was in a pocket neighborhood in Oakland, California called Maxwell Park. It was a 3-bedroom bungalow on a hill, and it had 2 features I desperately needed: a fenced yard for my 80-pound dog and a price tag I could afford. Being straight out of school, having exactly $10,000 in the bank, no parental help at all, and not getting my first paycheck until 3 weeks after we were scheduled to close. I was so happy to buy it. But 4 months later, when the house across the street sold for 34% less than I had paid for my house, to a single mom with 4 daughters who bought it through a government assistance program, I panicked. I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. I feared I was going to lose all my money. We'll skip the part where you realize I did not. The new family moved in, and the 4 little girls quickly made their presence known in the neighborhood. They spent an insane amount of time in my yard. And since I was working longer and longer hours, I offered the oldest one a job walking my dog every day. At the end of the week, I paid her. And an hour later, there was a knock on my door. And that's the first time I met their mother, who was a few years older than me, short, beautiful, an immigrant from Mexico, which you'll see a bit later is relevant, and a mom who was not happy that I had just handed her 12-year-old $50 without checking with her first. I didn't have kids, so that never occurred to me. I invited her in for a cup of coffee, and she's been my best friend for the last 25 years. When I bought the house there, Maxwell Park was this perfect microcosm of the rest of Oakland. It was around 40% Black, 15% Asian, 15% Latino, and 30% white. It was not the only place in the Bay Area that I could afford to buy at the time, but it was the most racially integrated place I'd ever lived in my life, and I loved it. I am so grateful that my realtor saw a single white girl in her 20s and decided to show me homes in a part of town that I'm sure so many others would have guided me away from. Quite literally, that changed my life. Later, you'll hear a lot more about that neighborhood and that neighbor. But first, let's talk about the brain science behind who is in your network. See, your brain is a remarkable achievement in evolution. Every compartment of the brain evolved itself into existence to ensure the survival of the human species. So today we're going to do a fun brain exercise. It involves picturing a variety of scenes in your head, but don't worry, I will guide you through these. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and visualize. And the visualization part is very important. Now, I know you're sitting at home or in your office with plenty to do. And when I say close your eyes, take a deep breath, and visualize, some of you have no intention of doing that. This is a great time to check your email. You'll just opt out. But I promise, if you join now, if you participate now, you will experience evolution in a way you never imagined. So everyone, please close your eyes. Take a deep breath and imagine that travel has started again. and you take an amazing tropical vacation. Really enjoy this. Then it ends, and on your flight home, you get into a nice conversation with the pilot who happens to live in your town and is looking to buy a new house. So that weekend, the two of you go to a broker's open of the most wonderful home. Picture this spectacular place. It's currently owned by the hot tech CEO who just sold a company and is about to buy a mansion. But at the open house, the tech CEO is there hanging out. And so is a newly married couple who also love this place and are prepared to make an all-cash offer. Oh, and their agent is your nemesis, the person you most want to beat out for this sale. So you should have a solid picture of all of that. The tropical vacation, the pilot looking to move, the perfect house, the tech CEO, the newlywed couple, and your arch rival. So now open your eyes, because I have some questions for you. In your mental image, was the pilot Black? Was the married couple 2 men? Did the tech CEO look like me? If any of your answers are no, and let's face it, they are, it's because your brain defaults to what's familiar. Brains don't like what's not familiar. The things I just mentioned are generally less familiar. The Black pilot, the same-sex married couple, the middle-aged female tech CEO. No matter how much you might love the idea of those things, your brain goes into high alert when you encounter anything unexpected. Encountering something or someone you aren't expecting launches a complex process in your brain. It goes between your brain and your endocrine system, and it results in cortisol being released into your bloodstream. This is your stress hormone. This is the trigger for fight or flight. And it happens in a matter of milliseconds, long before you have the chance to consciously think, I'm so happy consenting adults have the freedom to marry who they love. This means brains instinctively react to anything outside our personal norms, which means if you have a human brain, you have bias. There's no escaping it. Your brain reacts to what is not normal in your environment. So if you have a human brain, you have bias. Let's take all the judgment and the blame and the shame out of that. We're not here to figure out who's a good person or a bad person. That's not how unconscious bias works. Everyone here has bias. We have to admit it openly, or we're never going to be able to address it. Your brain releases all kinds of endorphins and other happy hormones when you're in the presence of what for you is normal. And it releases stress hormones when you're not, which means you're automatically biased against anything unexpected because you automatically default to your own norm. And norms are not neutral. Everyone has a different norm. Just because one group may have always been in the majority, it doesn't make their norm more accurate than anyone else's. Our norm is based on a whole lot of factors, on how we were raised, on experiences we've had or maybe never had with people who are different from us, on laws and government policies and community standards, and the media images that we have been fed our whole lives. These are the factors that determine what our brains see as a threat. These are our unconscious biases, and the insidious nature of unconscious bias is the unconscious part. Today, I'm going to share tools you can use to outsmart your brain, to outsmart your own unconscious bias, both in yourself and in your brokerage. By doing this, you will find it far easier to expand your network. One of the ways our unconscious bias shows up without us even realizing it is when we do things to remind someone that you are not the norm. Back when we met in person, my bookkeeper and I would meet at Starbucks to do my books. Last time we were there, we sat at one of those big round tables in the middle. We were there for hours because I don't do my books as often as I should. So over the course of the meeting, different parties came and sat with us and left. And one such party was a woman and her 3 children, a little boy around 9 and 2 little girls who were 6 and 7. And the little girls were so cute. They were both trying to sit on the same stool next to mom. And then they looked up and noticed that my bookkeeper's hair is purple. And they were enthralled. So we got to have a fun conversation with them about purple hair and their favorite color and what books they were reading. And then they got up and left. And I turned to my bookkeeper and I said, I am so curious about that little family. And she said, I know. But both of us knew better than to ask anything. You see, the mother was white. She presented as very white. And the 3 children were Black. So I want to ask you, what kinds of questions do you think that family gets asked every day? Drop in the chat just some of the questions you think people ask that family. Yeah, Kendrick says, are they your kids? What other questions do they get asked? Are the children adopted? Are they adopted? Yeah. Is the dad Black? They'll probably ask that all the time. Are you the nanny? These are the typical questions that people think they're asked. Are you the babysitter? People ask these kind of questions all the time. I have now shared this story with literally thousands of people. And so I've spoken with a number of people who have children who are different race. And you would not believe the questions they are actually asked. Things like, where did you get them? How much did they cost? Are you afraid of your children? How do you deal with their hair? Did the dad leave you? One woman was out with her children, was asked, do you work for Child Protective Services? I had a Black man in a session who has 2 white teenage daughters. And he said every time they're out together, people try to separate them to ask his daughters if they're okay, to the point where it's come into their decision-making as to whether they will go do something as a family based on how much they're willing to get harassed. And now I want to ask, what message does that send to that family? What message does that send? What effect does that have on them? And particularly those children. Drop in the chat, what message are we sending when we ask a question like, are they adopted? Are they yours? Yeah, it's unwelcoming, it's unsafe, that we fear them, that they are different, that they don't belong, that they are somehow the other. We send messages with our innocent questions that someone is somehow not normal, that their family's wrong, that they're the other. And when I share this story, I know there are people in this audience right now thinking, but I wouldn't be racist if I was asking that question. I wouldn't have any racist intent asking that. And my reply is, do you think it sounds any different to a 6-year-old who has already been bombarded with so many messages about her skin and her hair and so many other aspects of her being when it comes from a racist, as opposed to when it comes from somebody who's just curious? Which is why when it comes to matters about which all of our brains are instinctively biased, you have instinctive bias whenever you encounter anything that is not your norm, then you have to examine your own behavior, because your intentions don't matter, only the outcomes, only the effect you have on the other person. We've all heard the phrase that we judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their behavior. You may have heard that. Well, if that's true, remember, no one else is seeing your intentions, only your behavior. Now, there are people who think themselves so pure of heart and innocent and non-racist that they could ask a question or make a comment. In fact, they don't even see color. I don't even see color. Let's try not to use that phrase anymore. First off, it's a complete lie. You do see color. Nobody sat at that table and didn't notice that that woman was white and the 3 children calling her mommy were Black. But when we claim not to see color, we deny the lived experience of every person of color. We have to see color in order to embrace the beauty of diversity and work to ensure equality. When we claim not to see color, we ignore the reality of people being treated differently because of their color. And that is the reality. Now, What are some phrases people in real estate say that are the same as I don't see color? I've spoken at real estate conferences where I come off stage and people will literally say these things to me. So I'm using exact phrases that I have heard, like, you can be black, white, blue, purple. It's all the same to me as long as you got the money to buy. Tell that to the family trying to buy a house in a neighborhood where the police are called when they go in with their realtor to look at it. This is a transactional business. You buy, you sell. Who you are has nothing to do with it. Remember my first little house in Oakland? I committed bank fraud to buy that house. It was 26 years ago. There's a statute of limitations, so I'm free to talk about it now. Also, it's an extreme form of privilege that as a white woman, I'm willing to sit here and say I committed bank fraud. That's something not everybody could do quite as openly. But 3 days before the closing, the mortgage officer discovered a financial guarantee that needed to be in place that I didn't have. And remember, I didn't have parental help. My parents couldn't afford to help me buy a house. So a letter was drawn up that was completely untrue about a contribution my mother was going to make, and that solved the problem. It was one of those cases where everybody knew it was a lie. Everyone involved in the transaction knew it was a lie. And I have to wonder if the outcome would have been the same if my skin wasn't white. If that mortgage officer took that letter to his boss and said, here, problem solved, if the boss wouldn't have questioned it a little more that my mother was giving me that amount of money to buy a house if my skin wasn't white. So it's not about just having the money to buy. Please don't think real estate is about that. Buying a house is a marathon, not a sprint, and it requires a lot of people handing you Gatorade along the way. There are all kinds of reasons someone does or doesn't get to buy a house that have nothing to do with money. When I was 9 years old, my mother moved us to Floyd County, Indiana, a place where the largest social group in town was the Klan. And at a very early age, I became extremely attuned to racism and hate, picking up on even the slightest hints of it. And when I was 17, my mom married Frank, who had a lot of flaws, but racism wasn't one of them, or at least I thought. Frank's oldest son had been transferred to New Orleans before our parents got married, and his house had been on the market since he left. So one weekend he came home to finally sell it because he had a full price offer with no contingencies. I will never forget him sitting at our kitchen table telling his father about this offer and not seeming very happy about it. So Frank asked, what's going on? And Chuck said, well, it's a black fella and he's got a white wife and they got a couple kids. And Frank looked square at his son and said, don't you dare do that to your neighbors. And Chuck said, Dad, I got to sell the house. And Frank raised his voice and he said, not that way. And tell your girl not to show it anymore like that. Meaning his real estate agent. I got up from the table, went down the hall to my bedroom and cried for the next half hour. And I didn't even understand why. Chuck took the house off the market and rented it to a family friend. So time passed. And I went off to college in San Antonio, Texas, which conveniently by college student standards is not that long a drive from New Orleans. And even more conveniently, the drinking age in Louisiana was still 18. So Chuck and I got to know each other a lot better as crashing on his floor became something my friends and I did a lot. And one night Chuck and I stayed up talking and I asked what his dad meant that night when he said, don't do that to your neighbors. Chuck explained that if he'd sold the house to a mixed race couple, everyone's property values would go down. And I asked, according to who? And he shrugged and said, that's just how it is. So now, decades later, I've learned the answer to my question, according to who? Sadly, according to the federal government. According to housing authorities who throughout the 20th century kept populations segregated and even imposed segregation in places where it didn't previously exist. Federal, state, and local laws and FHA and VA policies that prevented African Americans from having equal access to housing lasted into the 1970s. And the 70s were not that long ago. There are people here today who remember the 70s, and one who would rather not. But back to this very serious subject. Our own government enforced discriminatory practices that shaped our images of home ownership and safe neighborhoods and who was and was not normal in our communities. This is a large contributor to all of our bias about who should live where, whether we realize it or not. But this history is not an excuse for getting it wrong today, for treating people differently because of the color of their skin, the accent they speak with, their faith or gender or sexual orientation. If you don't want the unconscious bias in your brain that you don't control, if you don't want that to control your behavior, because remember, others judge you by your behavior and intentions don't matter, only outcomes. There are ways to actively outsmart it. It is within our power to change, especially in the real estate community. Like, what can your brokerage do? Well, first, you can't manage what you don't measure. Track demographics, track behavior, track who comes through the door and how much time they get with an agent and what homes they're shown and what conditions are imposed on them. And then review those stats. Don't just track them, and have the courage and the discipline to address discrepancies. What faces show up in your marketing materials? Pay attention to that. Are you sending the message that high-end buyers get the luxury houses they want when working with anyone and everyone on your team? Are walk-in clients always sent to the person on floor time that day? Or do demographics come into play? Pat Combs, who was the president of NAR, did unconscious bias training in her own brokerage. Then, over the objection of legal counsel, tested her agents. And when she didn't like the results, she redid the training. Do you have any idea how much intestinal fortitude that takes? Look, the number one factor that determines the success of unconscious bias training is how much the person being trained cares about becoming less biased. As leaders, it's your job to motivate your team to care about this, not out of fear because it'll get them in trouble if they get it wrong, but because decent human beings know that we need to get it right. And your brokerage will make a lot more money when you get this right. So storytelling is a really good way to build empathy, and building empathy is how you get people to care. And when people care is when they ask for more training. So we heard stories. Lourdes and Reginald shared such powerful stories. Think about bringing that kind of storytelling into your brokerage. Second, establish clear policies that govern how everyone is treated. Have them in plain sight. Discuss them with your team often. Have in writing on the wall things like, no one is required to obtain pre-qualification before being shown a home. And we will show you all the homes in your price range and desired criteria. There was an undercover study on Long Island in New York conducted by Newsday, in which they did paired testing of real estate agents. A white person and a person of color would present the same facts and see if they were treated differently. In one such test, a Black woman was required to show ID before being shown a home when the white woman was not. And when I told my husband about that, he was appalled because we had just sold our condo and he couldn't believe anybody was brought into our home without somebody getting a copy of their ID first. Creating consistent written policies that apply to everyone not only eliminates bias, but it helps you enact smart business practices that you probably want to employ, like requiring an ID from everyone you show a home to, which might just be a good idea, full stop. Most importantly, expand your network. Bring in agents who don't look like you. Actively solicit clients who are demographically different. Recruit leadership in your association and your councils that are not represented there right now. Assist buyers in getting into attractive neighborhoods where they are breaking down the barriers. Expand everyone's definition of the norm. Think about the most important house a Black man ever moved into to change our view of the norm. Just imagine the long-ranging effects of that. One of them, in all likelihood, is that a Black South Asian woman is now Vice President of the United States. Change what is seen as normal and you will change the world. More than that, when you expand your network, you expand your wealth. Do you see everyone you meet as a potentially valuable connection or only a few people? Why are you excluding the others? And what about the person clearing the dishes from the table or parking your car? What are your preconceived notions about them? Let me tell you a little more about my best friend from Maxwell Park. As I mentioned, she's a Mexican immigrant. She speaks with a very heavy accent. She made her living as a bus driver for Alameda County Transit. She has 8 grandchildren, and she just retired with a fully funded pension. She moved to the Oregon coast, bought a little fixer-upper there for cash, did a lot of work, and it's now worth twice what she paid for it. And what about that house back in Oakland? It was paid off 14 years ago, and this week, this happened. And the pending offer is a lot more than the number you see. How many real estate agents do you think rode her bus every week and because of their unconscious bias never thought to make a connection? Look at the commission that could have gone to the one who did. Who might own a house that you're not even considering connecting with? Which nurse, which teacher, which police officer or plumber or manicurist? Expand your view. We have to start with these steps, not just to create a more equitable world, but to expand the value of our own networks. The only way to make progress is for us to all participate, to opt in, to be willing to examine our behavior and our beliefs and adjust. I'm in a Facebook and Clubhouse group that addresses race in real estate. And one issue that often comes up is the way real estate professionals are treated by other real estate professionals. Reginald referred to this when he talked about walking into a realtor meeting. There are multiple stories of realtors and realtists showing up for a broker's open and being asked for ID or a business card after watching white professionals walk in front of them and not be asked for that. Some have been followed around when they tried to look at a home. One realtor took her son to buy a house in a new housing development, and when they walked into the sales office, the first thing the sales agent said to them was, "These homes start in the 700s. Not even hello. She didn't even stand up from behind the desk. She didn't say that to anyone else who walked in. Could it have been because they were Black? I think we can go ahead and say yes. Please don't try to explain away that kind of behavior or go looking for other reasons. That doesn't help anyone. Denial and silence do not promote diversity or inclusion. A lot of racism happens in silence. Believe people when they tell you race is a factor in how they were treated. Now, Article 10 of the Code of Ethics of the National Association of Realtors says, realtors shall not deny equal professional service to any person for reasons of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Asking one person to prove they belong there and not asking anyone else is a denial of equal professional service. Now, if a client shows up to buy a house or a realtor arrives showing and they're not the race or gender or shape or size or religion or, the original language, whatever, if they're not what you're expecting, do not deny that at that moment, your body has a stress response. In microseconds, before you even realize it, when someone unexpected walks through the door, your brain starts the process that releases cortisol into your bloodstream with that initial shock. And cortisol is your stress hormone. Don't try to plow through the encounter and pretend it's not happening. You say to that person, "Welcome, I'm so happy to see you." Practice that. Practice it at home, at all times, in all circumstances, so that as soon as anyone walks through the door, the first thing you can say is, welcome, I'm so happy to see you. But if you're having a stress response because that is not who you expected, then you say, excuse me, there's something I have to do quick. I'll be right back. And step away and go to a break room or a bathroom or wherever you can and take a deep breath. Let's all, deep breath dissipates cortisol. Try it right now. Deep breath dissipates cortisol. And once you've taken that deep breath, say to yourself, I will treat this person as if they are who I expected. Then do a quick visualization. Visualize yourself interacting with the person who looks like you originally expected. Or just visualize yourself meeting with someone who looks like you. Get that in your brain and feel it in your chest, then go back and conduct yourself that way. The difference will seem imperceptible, but it won't be. The other person will perceive it and you will do better. You will be more successful. When you are willing to admit bias, you can stop it. So don't be afraid to spot it, especially in yourself. We, all of us, have an obligation to see in ourselves and call out in each other where, when, and how bias is manifesting. And I know this is a challenge. I know this is uncomfortable for people to discuss and confront. I know change is hard and it's not fun. And it's easy to abandon when you're the one who has always enjoyed the privilege of being able to walk away from this issue at any time. Don't settle for that privilege. Be the person who points out to yourself and to others when something is problematic. Now, pointing out to someone that their attitudes or some of their language they use or their beliefs might be problematic is hard. In fact, it's nearly impossible. Ask yourself, when was the last time you felt comfortable telling someone they had bad breath? But yes or no in the chat, if you had bad breath, would you want someone to tell you? In the chat, yes or no? Julie says, please do. Yes. So if you're being racially problematic or gender problematic or sexual orientation problematic or national origin problematic, wouldn't you want someone to tell you? And for the people on this call, and you can take this back into your brokerages and your associations, I have created a little shorthand for this. I call it spinach in your teeth. You say to someone, excuse me, you might have some spinach in your teeth. That's the thing we all want to be told. And when you say to someone, you might have some spinach in your teeth, you're going to get one of three responses. One is either, yep, I heard it right away, got it. And it can happen in the meeting, like, whoa, you might have some spinach in your teeth, or it can happen after the meeting. You know, I don't know if you realize, but when you replied that way, you had some spinach in your teeth. So they might say, yep, got it, I heard it right away. Or they might say, I don't understand, tell me more. Or they might say, I just don't want to hear it. Don't talk to me about that. If someone responds that way, well, bless their hearts. They're on the way out. And trust me, that is an attitude and a belief that is not sustainable going into the next generation. It's a new day. It is a day where we all agree to bear the obligation and the discomfort of progress, where we examine our resistance to change and we call ourselves out on it, where we do create safe spaces, but not for ourselves to think that we're fine because we don't have racist or sexist or prejudiced intentions, but for others to share their diverse perspectives with us so we can hold ourselves accountable for the inadvertent racist and sexist and prejudiced outcomes that our behavior and that our society creates. Remember, intentions don't matter, only outcomes. So I want to share very quickly, there is a book that affects the real estate industry, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. It's a collection of facts about who did and did not have the legal ability to own a home, or the economic assistance the government provided, why some people got to use their GI benefits and others didn't, why some people earn less minimum wage for the exact same job. If you want to learn about any of history that happened in your lifetime, and definitely in your parents' lifetime, go ahead. This is a great place to start. And if you believe there's a level playing field in this country, you're choosing to ignore our recent history. And that level of ignoring, I'm not going to go so far as to say ignorance, but that level of ignoring no longer serves anyone, least of all you. So if you want to reach me following this event for anything, I'm at Speak Happiness. You can just email Valerie at speakhappiness.com. I want to thank Kathy and Novelette, Janet, Julie, and Patrick for inviting me to be part of this and for your incredible work putting this event together. This topic is so important. It touches all of our lives, and it has for a lifetime. I finally figured out why I went to my bedroom and cried that night back in Indiana more than 30 years ago. It was the thought of that man being denied something as basic as a home for his children because of the color of his skin. When I asked my stepbrother why he wouldn't sell his house to a mixed race couple, he said, that's just how it is. Have you ever heard someone say this about why some neighborhoods are segregated? That's just how it is. I imagine most of us have heard some version of that. People prefer to live among their own. Or this is a safe neighborhood. We just want it to stay that way. I can't change the way the world works. That's just how it is. Do you think that's right? Answer in the chat. Everybody answer in the chat. Do you think that's right? There are 40 people on this call. I'm one of them, so I don't count, but I better see 39 responses in this chat because none of us can opt out. Do you think that's right? Look at this. So every one of us knows that that's wrong, which means every one of us knows that it has to change. Do you think real estate agents should be at the forefront of that change? As a real estate professional, just tell me yes or no in the chat. Do you have the power to create the change our housing markets need? Yes or no? Do you have the character it takes to create the change? Do you have the strength of will to want to create the change? I see these yeses, yeses, yeses. Let's get past the yes or no now, and let's really share your truth. Really answer, do you have the power and the character and the strength of will to create the change our housing markets need? Tell us what you truly believe. Tell us if you can make the commitment to expand your view and expand your network and expand who has access to home ownership. Show your passion for this. Do you have the power and the strength of will and the character to create the change? I want to see these answers. Oh, thank you. Look at this. And we can do this. We can do it, all of us. I will prove it to you. You are ready for this. Let's do one more visualization. Let's do one more visualization. And this time, I want you to really take time with it. Once again, close your eyes and take a deep breath. Now, imagine you're showing a penthouse condo to a chemistry professor who just got tenure. Picture you're meeting new neighbors who just bought the house next door. Imagine two people who need a larger home because they just adopted a baby. Visualize an interview with the ideal candidate to join your team. Now, open your eyes and drop in the chat. Do your mental images differ substantially now than they did just 45 minutes ago? Good. Everyone's answering. Everyone's answering, and that's important. Because I promised you'd experience evolution. And all you had to do was opt in. And now I think we have a featured business.
I am sorry. Our future business is Your Way Eatery.
Hi, my name is David, founder of Your Way Eatery here in Gardena. I would like to invite you down to try one of our gourmet sandwiches, salads, smoothies, or ice cream. We also specialize in catering, any size event. One way that you realtors and I can collaborate is we can do charcuterie boards for you, we can do platters, we can do gift certificates for your potential house showings and clients. I want to thank the South Bay Association of Realtors for spotlighting our business during Black History Month. We appreciate you. Look forward to doing business with you guys. You can find us on Yelp, or you can find us on Google. Your Way Eatery, look us up on Yelp or Google Maps. We appreciate you, and like you say, enjoy the rest of this Black History Month. God bless.
One second. Okay, thank you guys. We have our last personal stories, and this is by Mr. Kendrick Kim from Orange County Realtors. Mr. Kim has been a realtor since 2008 and also a part-time college professor since 2014 teaching real estate. Mr. Kim, you're up.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank you for those that shared your story. I got into real estate in 2008, and one of the things about bias experience or unconscious bias experiences, as an Asian American, there's an assumption that we're the model minority myth, that nothing phases us, we have money and everything's okay. And I realized that a lot of real estate agents, really assume that because when I have clients that are Asian, that, hey, yeah, South Orange County, they have money, we'll take them to Irvine and whatnot. And I didn't understand why, like, what is this deal with Irvine? And then when I came to Irvine in 2008 and 9, I realized, oh, everyone looks like me. I'm safe there. And that's a sad thing to say, right? Because I don't feel safe, if it's not an Asian area, because, it feels like there's a lot of biases, especially in Orange County. Another example I have is when I went door to door. Everyone has an experience of door knocking. And when you go door knocking, people don't like you. They don't want solicitation and they slam the door on you real quick. But one of my African-American colleagues, we were walking together, door knocking, and we we're just chatting. And whenever he went up to door knock, they didn't open the door. Once they opened the door, he didn't have a chance to speak. But when I did that, I had at least 30 seconds to a minute to kind of talk before they slammed the door in my face or say, hey. And I was wondering, like, wow, this is weird. And then in the neighborhood, if you're familiar with Baston Cherry area in Harbor, that's like St. Jude territory. Like everything is St. Jude and the horse ranch properties. And when we're walking that neighborhood, there's cars that would drive by and slow down. And they do the drive look like this, slowly. And I was wondering, what are they looking at, right? And then I just didn't understand. And then when we went back to the office, we're in the elevator. And as we got into the elevator, a white woman kind of clutched her purse when she saw a black man. But when she saw me, it was like, I'm the safe one. And we had a conversation, and I said, did you find it weird that cars would drive by and look at us slowly? What's going on? And he proceeded to explain to me that that's being Black in Orange County. And I didn't understand that. And we had this conversation. And that's when I first got a lesson about the talk that his family gave him about how to deal with police, how to deal with law enforcement, and how to deal with situations that are unsafe to him because he's Black. And I really wanted to learn and experiment, like, what's going on. And then I realized that within my own Asian community, we do have anti-Blackness that we need to address, right? And I think in real estate, I thought because of the code of ethics and because we're professionals, the whole racism and microaggressions would not be there. But the bias and stereotypes are always going to be there. It never goes away. And I just wanted to say that as realtors, I think all of you have hit the point where we have to look within ourselves and that bias. And I realize with what's going on with the Asian American community since the pandemic, as Valerie mentioned about biases and perceptions and how we think as white is right in a way. Because when we did that first exercise, when we're thinking about who's the CEO, who's the professor going into the luxury areas, we think of them as white. And I realized that it's a lot of othering in schools, in the real estate industry. As Asians, we're like the others, but we're also like considered the model minority and we're mainstream, right? And it's like two sides to the coins for Asian Americans. And I think for as BIPOC, people of color, we also have to realize that within our own industry that we have to recognize Asians as people of color, and that we do have a lot of issues that is unnoticed or unsaid. And it could be a cultural thing because we don't speak out, or a stereotypical thing that we're just passive and safe. And I think as real estate professionals with that bias training, it's very critical and important. And I really appreciated Valerie sharing that. It also opened up a lot of wounds of my childhood, and it opened up a lot of wounds of me growing up. It opened up a lot of wounds of my experience in the real estate industry. When I first worked for a brokerage, I was the token Asian where I had to translate for people who weren't Korean. And I told the broker, I'm Korean, right? You're asking me to translate for a Chinese couple and a Vietnamese couple, and they speak English just right. It may be an accent English, but if you take the time to listen and talk to them, you could get the transaction done. I don't understand why you're using me as a Korean person to try to talk to a Chinese person or a Vietnamese person thinking I could speak the same language. And that was in 2008. So I thought, has things changed? Also, by the way, open houses and things like that, I've experienced that with a lot of Black colleagues that I've had in Orange County, right? And I think we need a systemic change for the real estate industry and for society. And thank you for allowing me to share my story. I didn't mean to ramble, but I tell you, this group has definitely been my safe space and truly allowed me to self-reflect and share my wounds and kind of, open up more about that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kendrick. That's why we create this group, for a safe space for everybody to come and vent. I call it vent. But before we move on, we are going to highlight one more minority business owned, small minority business owned in Salt Bay. And that one will be Chef Catering. Great. I did say one more, but I have to put this one in. This will pump you up. And that is the Beastly Boxing Gym. Let's go.
Good job, ladies. Good job. I am Cedric Jones, founder of Beastie Gym right here in Manhattan Beach. We are the gym with soul. Welcome to Beastie Gym, the gym with soul. The gym with soul. We want to say anything you need, we have it. Whether it's fitness goals, weight loss goals, boxing, cardio, conditioning, we got it all, baby. Is that the gym? Does this look like a regular commercial? No, it's not the regular commercial. I'll tell you this. If you come out and sign up with us right now, I give you $50 off your first membership. You want soul, this is it. You want results, this is it.
Great. Now I'm going to turn it over to Miss Valerie to introduce our next guest. Miss Valerie?
Thank you, Janet. Man, Chef's Catering made me hungry, and then Beastie Gym made me feel guilty about it.
That's it.
I'm gonna go have a cookie and then have a workout, I guess. So, for everyone, how many times have you seen a story in the news or heard about something happening in your community and thought, I would really love to hear what the police department has to say about that? Or have you ever wished you could just pick up the phone and call a cop and ask your question? When we were designing today's event, it occurred to all of us that this is the perfect platform to have those conversations. And we are incredibly fortunate that when invited, our guest today went to those in charge of the Torrance PD and said, when better than now for us to engage with our community? And we are so grateful that he did. Sergeant Ron Sallery is a Torrance Police Sergeant assigned to community affairs as well as a public information officer. Ron's career with the Torrance PD started 22 years ago when he joined the Torrance PD and graduated from the Orange County Sheriff's Academy. As the public information officer, Ron was educated through his interaction with the community on the need for officers to learn about the impact of bias and law enforcement. Ron attended the California Commission on Police Officer Standard Training Instructors course for Principled Policing, Procedural Justice, and Implicit Bias. In addition to Ron's current community affairs assignment, he is a Principled Policing, Procedural Justice, and Implicit Bias instructor for the Torrance Police Department. Ron has worked in various assignments at the Torrance Police Department, from crime scene investigator to motor officer. However, the majority of his career has centered around training. Ron's worked as a field training officer, field training sergeant, and administrative field training sergeant. Ron transitioned from his desire to train new officers to hiring new officers and worked as the personnel sergeant in charge of hiring at the Torrance PD. Before joining the force, Ron received his BA from Long Beach State University. And although Ron's family is deeply rooted in Alabama, he grew up locally right here in the South Bay. Welcome, Sergeant Sallery. I think we might have you on mute.
How about now?
Yes, we can hear you now, but if you could turn the volume up a little. So,
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for being here today. Let's start. I want to talk about your work on principled policing, because I think that's something most of us are unfamiliar with. What is principled policing and how does it affect our communities?
Yes, absolutely. When I joined community affairs, there was I joined about 3 years ago, and there was a lot of public discussion about the role of law enforcement and bias going on. And so I communicated with different groups regarding that, and I found myself in those conversations and talking about different areas of bias. And I thought that I knew enough as a police officer going through the academy and being on the law enforcement for this long to kind of know what's going on in our department regarding bias and what we're doing about it. But it was actually those conversations that brought to my attention, hey, it made me think, do I really know? What formal training have I had regarding bias and what's being done at the police department? And so as a result of this, I sought out to find out what we were doing, and I learned that there wasn't a lot of formal training other than the academy. You know, we have our code of ethics, policies and procedures, but what specifically is being done, and there wasn't at the time. So I sought out training to learn more about bias in law enforcement, and I wanted to share that information with my peers. Around the same time, Post came out with really good training, and Post is the Commission on Police Officer Standard and Training. They were established by the California legislators, and they set the minimum standard for selecting a police officer in the state of California and for training in the state of California. And so they came out with this course, and I attended it. It's a heavy course to teach because it's not the law enforcement cultural norm. And for that same reason, there's a lot to learn from it. The course, I think it's good to know the partners that were a part of making this course possible. First, California Post was, and the California Department of Justice was a part of it. Oakland Police Department helped form it. Stockton Police Department. Stanford Spark, which is the social psychological answers to real world questions, and California's Partnership for Safe Communities. The course objective is to teach officers to understand principal policing concepts and understand the different roles policing has in the history and generational effects. It explains implicit bias and intervention strategies, and we learn ways to implement procedural justice. And so procedural justice is the procedure used by police officers where citizens are treated fairly and with proper respect as human beings. And it has 4 tenets that make up the procedural justice, and they are voice, neutrality, respect, and trustworthiness. And so the 4 tenets of procedural justice is about applying it internally at Torrance Police Department first and foremost. So officers must be treated internally by giving them voice and being neutral and showing respect and creating trust. It's really important that we do it internally first. And the reason why is that all the studies show that when this is demonstrated internally first, then officers will demonstrate it in the field. Police departments that don't do this, that do not maintain this internally and have more issues because the officers who represent those agencies have much less propensity and desire to demonstrate it. So there are higher rates with these departments of complaints and mistrust with community issues. We learned that we teach our officers that implicit bias is those thoughts or feelings about, people that we are unaware of and which can influence our own and others' actions. And we learned that implicit bias is a human condition. As a police officer, we judge ourselves by our intentions. That's just our training reinforces that. And you mentioned that earlier. We are all about intentions. The laws are representing about intentions. When you get out of the academy, you go through the field training program, and intentions are everything. But the community, it judges us by our actions. How that looks in motion is people judging officers by the process, by how they were treated by police. And so officers learn that the process is at least equal to the outcome, if not even more important than the outcome itself. And that's kind of like a paradigm shift for law enforcement in the culture. And so officers, when we enforce the law, especially with felonies, but in general, many times there's not a lot of discretion. For example, what I mean by that is while we're conducting an investigation for, let's say, a potential drunk driver, as officers, our intentions are determined if the reasonable suspicion rises to probable cause to determine arrest. That's completely where we're at, is that intention. But for the person being detained, they're focused on how they're being treated during the process. And that's what matters, if not is the same, more than the outcome itself. And so in order for us to learn about how this all fits together in procedural justice, we teach our officers about law enforcement's role, their history, and the justice system's legitimacy. And so the impact of the history on police and community relations, and how policing can be used for control.
What is the what is the level of receptiveness inside the department when you bring in things like this kind of training and you say, you know, especially the 4 tenets that you talked about, trustworthiness and showing respect for the people that you're policing. Is there, you know, joyful acceptance that that's the way we should be doing things, or do you meet with resistance?
Definitely, there is resistance. Absolutely. When I talked initially about meeting with different community members and discussing our policies and procedures at Torrance Police Department, and the focus of it was on bias. And I thought, hey, I need to find out more about this because I just didn't feel like I was educated enough to know exactly the full picture of it. So I went out looking to educate myself on it. My point being is I went and signed up for courses and looked for it because I wanted to know more, and I was resistant to it when I went and did this. So yeah, definitely there is resistance. And that resistance, it manifests in different ways, but I think the most significant is that it is shown in, hey, there are some historical components of how law enforcement has been used in the past for control. And then you have officers who are very young who have a distance from that and saying, how does that represent what I'm doing today? And when we're starting this conversation. And so there's a component where we teach about the history, and we go really far back into the history and we bring it up to the current history. I mean, we'll talk about the Slave Act and the convict lease program, Tulsa race massacres. You mentioned earlier, we talk about Jim Crow laws, and you talked about some things that affect generational, our parents and ourselves. And Jim Crow laws just ended in 1965. And that affects just about everyone here, you know, in one way or another. We talk about Japanese American internment camps and Emmett Till murders, Stonewall riots. And so when we're talking about this, we bring it home because those things are important, but we also learn about historical elements specific to Torrance and redlining policy specific to Torrance that contributed to what our community looks like today. And I just want to reiterate that redlining was a practice of preventing services to minorities based on red lines drawn on a map. And you keep specifically those minorities out. But it wasn't just for real estate, it was for all services. So you would have red lines drawn on a map where minorities couldn't go to the grocery store or get medical treatment. And so we talk about and identify how that occurred here in Torrance. And so we do the historical module. It's to review and understand why communities have stress, and also increase understanding on why some communities within our communities focus blame upon the law enforcement profession. And people sometimes see the police as the enemy of the people, and we learn about the reasons behind that perception. Policing is an honorable vocation, but it's been used for dishonorable ways in the past. And this segment is not about taking anything away from the officers or placing the blame, but every police encounter with the community it's either a deposit or a withdrawal. Every contact is an opportunity to increase legitimacy or practice procedural justice. I'm sorry, you had a...
Yeah, it's one of the things you and I had discussed prior to all of this is that fear affects people's brain function in a way. Like my area of expertise, that when someone is in fear, it shuts down their prefrontal cortex, which helps them to make your decision making and your social interaction and your control of your emotions all happens in your prefrontal cortex. And when that amygdala is triggered and you're in fear, your prefrontal cortex stops working. And I'm
Right.
curious how that factors into how police choose to do their jobs, both in how they are trained to control their own fear and also how they are trained to respond to someone else who maybe they're imposing fear on. And as a result, that person isn't making good decisions or controlling their emotions the way that they would under normal circumstances.
Yeah, we kind of describe those in class, those fears as fast traps. And so we learned that a fast trap is like, it's a situation that makes us more vulnerable to rely on our implicit biases. And so contributors to these fast traps are being like, for officers, and it's like a daily work routine when I mention them, but mentally taxed if you're tired, you're prone to being in a fast trap and relying on those biases, or being in a bad mood or threatened. You're going to do that, or being just inexperienced or needing to make a quick decision or multitasking. You know, all people are susceptible to these fast traps, and so working alongside that in these fast traps, this is where that line gets blurred, because that's where you can easily have stereotypes which can be confused with ideas, and prejudice which can be mixed with beliefs, and discrimination which can be hidden in behavior. You know, and so how do we teach them to mitigate that and be aware of it?
You're
mentioned
trained,
earlier,
you're trained to trust your gut, right?
right? You do that, but the training, attending training is significant, but there's a lot of components that go in with it. Training's not enough, but time management, decreasing your stress. So I mentioned about being tired. You know, it's law enforcement, I think, is no different than a lot of other jobs, real estate or anywhere else, where you may have long hours and you're prone to being tired. Law enforcement, it's very normal to do double shifts. So on that second shift, you're really prone to falling into a fast trap because you're already tired. There's that first element. And so you mix tired with having to make a quick decision while you're under stress, and the brain tries to fall into that little neat package of what sometimes it's called a gut feeling, but it can easily be your biases that you have grouped together. And so knowing about that, knowing how to learn techniques to decrease your stress, sharpening your skills, holding yourself accountable and each other accountable, and then basics like remembering why you joined law enforcement or your career, or you're doing this. And the other part of the fast trap is increasing your positive context. And the reason why that's important is because we learn about different biases, like confirmation bias, which is favoring or seeking evidence that confirms existing beliefs while discounting contradictory evidence. And you can imagine in law enforcement, when you're investigating a crime, how you could easily fall into that confirmation bias, or anchoring bias, which is the tendency to rely on the first piece of information you see, and you just stick with that first piece of information. Or negativity bias. And so usually when you're calling a police officer, it's because there's already a problem, usually, and there's something negative associated with it. And negativity bias is that tendency to recognize negative or positive situations, events, or in people, you know, and you stick with that negativity. And so you now start to associate that negativity with those events, with those peoples all the time, because we don't have very many positive situations to associate. And so you undo that, you mitigate these biases by increasing positive context.
But with that you have to actively choose. I mean, that has to be a proactive choice that you're making. Say, I'm going to increase my positive contacts with the community. And Kendrick mentioned door knocking as something that is actually much more dangerous to non-white, particularly Black and brown realtors. And one issue that I know realtors of color face is having the police called by a neighbor when they're entering a home that's for sale. The Cincinnati Police Department just had to pay a $151,000 settlement to a realtor and his client because they were showing a house and the police showed up and handcuffed them without bothering to ascertain if they belonged there or not, legitimately. And can you walk us through what happens, beginning to end, when a 911 call comes in saying someone's breaking into a house in my neighborhood? What process happens on the police side of that, and how can we work together to mitigate the danger that causes to realtors of color?
So the one thing I would like to explain is that when that 911 call comes in, there's a lot of different ways that it comes in that can really influence the outcome or that initial contact. A lot of times I see opportunities that, and I don't know, maybe there'll be people that are watching this that have experiences, but I see opportunities of bias by proxy with police officers where they're used to, the individual citizen may have some bias towards the person, and they'll call the law enforcement agency and they will give out information, sometimes intentionally, explicitly, or not, and law enforcement will have to respond. Now, I say that because there are different ways. There's the 911 call, and then there is the 911 call that someone is breaking into a home, and then there's the 911 call where I see suspicious behavior.
Okay.
And so those two are different. And so I'm always cautioned when I say that there are rules or policies where we have to act a certain way, because then that's the first clue to me that, hey, maybe there's a problem if we have to act a certain way. However, when it comes to a 911 call, as it stands now, and there's no scenarios I can think of that don't fall in this category, officers are going to have to come out and they're going to have to verify that information. And usually a 911 call for an active crime requires a specific response. But where I see incredible opportunity for us to mitigate bias by proxy is that 911 call for suspicious behavior, where our dispatchers who do a really good job at identifying what is suspicious and what about this behavior is different from other behavior. Why do you believe that this house is being broken into this time? And so you have to ask really good questions. There's a lot of good training and awareness that goes on before that call ever happens to ask those questions to narrow down this suspicious behavior so that you can give that information to the officers. And training goes into the officers too to recognize the potential. However, going back to the 911 call of an active crime happening now, there's a lot of information they're going to collect, but when someone says there's an active crime happening now, the way policies and procedures are written, the first priority is to get law enforcement there right away because we have this active crime happening now. And as we're en route there, you try to get more information to confirm the active crime. So to answer your question about the 911 call for an active crime, there's a burglary at a house right now. The first thing we're going to do is get officers en route to that burglary at the house. Before we even ask those probing questions, we're going to do that right away for safety, for the active component of it. But while we're en route, now the dispatcher and our communications division is ran by really good civilian dispatchers, and we have officers who are in there too for this very reason, to help with discerning that information. And then you'll get specific information about description and method of.
Do you ask if the house is for sale?
No, not initially. Initially, what they'll ask is, like, for a 911 call for a burglary now, first I want to make sure that, are you the person in the house or are you observing the house being broken into? Because that makes a huge difference. We've already learned from our experiences that there's a potential to be wrong if it's not your house. Like if you call me and you say that it's your house and you're being broken into, well, we're going to just skip right ahead that this is happening right now. But if you're someone observing it, now we're going to try to figure out why you know enough information about that house to identify that it's being broken into. And it could just be obvious where the answer is someone just threw or kicked in the front door. All right, that kind of limits it. We're going to get information, but we're going to get more information to discern that, to answer your question.
What safety precautions can any realtor take to ensure they're safe when doing their job, whether it's accessing the lockbox to enter a vacant home or meeting a potential client at a home to show them around? What can make that realtor more safe?
I think that what can make it safe, what can make them safe is if police are involved for some reason. You're talking about safety once law enforcement's on scene, or safety when they're going alone to a house?
Both. What are safety precautions and what about when law enforcement's already on scene?
Okay, so if they're going to the house, I think it's a good idea that if you're going to go to a house and maybe you're meeting a client there, and maybe they're already doing this, but someone should know where you're at all times, and so that you are seeing someone at a location, who that person is. Make sure that information is available. When law enforcement is called to the scene and you have no idea, we'll just show up and we're contacting a real estate agent, please follow the directions of the law enforcement officer. If there is anything that you don't agree with, barring an officer asking you to harm someone, but if there's something you don't agree with, like the behavior, or if the officer is not displaying, or you think there's some biases coming out with the contact with the officer, I can't say enough, but it's important to follow those directions. Let's resolve the safety issue of identifying, and that officer should be identifying you once it's safe, but you follow those directions. And once you've done that, you have every right to address any biases regarding that contact on scene at that time with that officer or the officer supervisor. But the first priority would be to follow the directions so that we can resolve the situation to a safe conclusion. And then once that's done, if there's anything to address, you can address them.
So we're going to open it up for questions from our audience. So if you're in the audience and you have a question, at the bottom of your screen, you see a little thing that says reactions. If you click on reactions, you'll see a thing that says raise your hand. If you have a question you want to ask for Sergeant Salary, go ahead and raise your hand, and that gives Julie the opportunity to see that you want to ask a question and to spotlight you so that you can come on screen, unmute, and raise your hand and ask that question. And before we get to that, I want to ask also, while people are raising their hands, I'll ask one last question. What would you say to a realtor who would say, I want to put my Black clients in an upscale neighborhood, but they're afraid of getting harassed by neighbors and by the police just trying to do normal things, to take a jog after work, to knock on a neighbor's door, to borrow a ladder? What should everyone involved be doing so that people of color can experience the quiet enjoyment of homes in a nice neighborhood?
That's a good question, Valerie. So
Didn't mean to sneak attack.
Yeah. So I remember as a young officer, I had a situation like that where I came out to a call for a neighbor dispute. And so one of the neighbors was telling me about what was going on next door. And it was a lot of potential crimes, vandalisms and burglaries and stuff like that. And so this neighbor was telling me that information. I'm like, okay. And so they were never the victim of any of the crimes. And so I went to talk to the other neighbor who's the actual suspect. And keep in mind, this call came out as a neighbor dispute. So I already have an idea that one side may not be telling the whole picture. And so the first side didn't seem quite clear, but potentially there's crimes. And I went to the other neighbor who was a minority group member. And that person told me, no. When they're talking about vandalism, one time my little daughter turned around on their grass and when she was riding her bike up and down the street, and that's what this person is referring to, but there's no other crime. So it was clear that this was about exactly what you were describing there. And so for me, as a young officer, the best thing that I could do is show how to publicly embrace that individual, of how I'm going to be there, how their struggle is my struggle, how I'm not going to be caught up in those biases, not just to have that one call, but I made a habit to go back to that house, even when they're not calling me, just to communicate and say hi and talk to them and just make it clear that I'm there to support them. I think there are a lot of people out there who want to support, especially when it comes to biases. And I think that the explicit biases are really loud, and they may seem like they're the only bias out there and that that's the only opinion out there. But I think the majority of us are good people who want to help and really make a difference and a change. And a lot of times it's just the information not out there. You don't know that someone needs that help. And so the Neighborhood Watch program was something that helped that neighbor overcome this one individual who also had problems with everyone else in the neighborhood too, but this one was specifically based on their race for that one neighbor.
Thank you. So I will turn it over. I know we've got some questions, so I will leave it to Julie to pull up the people who have questions and let them ask.
Perfect. Thank you, Valerie. I see Kendrick Kim has a question. Kendrick, you can unmute.
Hi, how are you? Ron, first of all, thank you for your presentation and educating officers about their bias and trying to help out. My question is about, in Orange County, the police officers are very different and, almost very combative. And someone that looks like me is safe, but, Black people and Latinx people, they're very looked upon as the other. I've seen it firsthand when I'm walking the neighborhood to do door knocking, or even just recently, as 2 years ago when I was doing a showing, You know, police officers are always harassing those communities, and it's the fear of, even if you're following instructions, the fear of just getting shot. How do you tell those people in those communities, like, hey, officers are here to help you, when their experience is every time I walk out, they think I'm a gangster or something like that, and they already assume and have judgment against me? Um, how do you communicate that to those communities and to those people, especially the young, you know, the youngins, you know, 18 to 25-year-olds that, you know, may make that mistake, even with the talk about putting your hands on the wheels and things like that. I've seen that, and I just want to know how can we communicate that to those young folks, to try to say, hey, I know you might be scared, or something that, as you mentioned, stay calm and follow instructions and talk about it afterwards. And sometimes young people, they have a little bit of excitement, you know, and we were all young once, and sometimes we like to mouth off. Only difference is sometimes, depending on the color of your skin, your mouthing off may get you killed. So is there any advice for that?
So at Torrance Police Department, we approach that a couple of ways. One is that we have programs that reach out to our youth in high school and in middle school. The idea is that the younger we can make a relationship with them and build in that relationship, the better. Instead of, it's always good to build a relationship when you have an opportunity, but instead of when they're already teenagers or young adults out in the world, because it's less likely we'll have an opportunity to cross their path. So we reach out to them in school, and we have Teens in Policing, where we take young teens and we bring them to the police department, and they're usually there's different ways you can be a part of the program, and we'll bring them to the police department and we'll show them about law enforcement, the different groups. But the main reason for it is for them to create that relationship of communication, which is, I think that's how that change starts. The other thing that I think is really important, I kind of mentioned it earlier, is that it is really important for departments, especially, I'll talk about Torrance Police Department, I'm not sure of Orange County, but for Torrance Police Department, to embrace what I'm talking to you about right now, principal policing, procedural justice, implicit bias, internally. Because if you embrace it internally, officers will go out and they will reflect what they're treated like internally. And it results in less complaints and having people treated with the respect that they should be treated as human beings. The other thing is that we teach our officers that just because someone is yelling at you or not following your directions to the point where it's not affecting safety, they're just affecting procedure, doesn't necessarily warrant the response that you're being treated with. So meaning, I'm okay, give people a chance to react and not follow directions as long as it's not a safety issue, so that they can vent and let that out, and maybe we can have a conversation from that point of getting to a safer point. But that's something that our officers are educated on, because going back to that what I was saying earlier about outcome and our intentions versus how people are treated, and our intentions is that you should be following directions and you should do what I say immediately. And so that's not necessarily the case, and being taught that that's not the case and how to deal with that and recognize the difference between that not being the case and it's safe and it's okay versus unsafe is a huge difference in that young person who just doesn't have the experience to follow the directions, but it's not unsafe. Or maybe they're just upset and that's their first response, but give them an opportunity, like in the 4 tenets that we teach, to have a voice and be upset and express that.
I love that so much, that we're going
Thank
to
you,
make
Ron.
sure, yes, that young people have the opportunity to be upset without being killed. Because I think we all have had moments in our lives when we were not at our best, and that is not the time when we want to be interacting with the police. So I'm happy to hear that police departments are now taking this on as an issue and becoming aware. And Sergeant Salary, thank you so much for your work on this, for being a champion in the Torrance PD on these issues, and especially for joining us here today, because I know you put yourself in the hot seat and we very much appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Valerie. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
This is a pleasure. And I'm turning it back over to Novelette Witt.
So, thank you, Valerie. Bill Brown is the second generation realtor from Alamo, California. He has been active in organized real estate for the past 40 years, and he's the founder of Oakland-based Investment Properties, a division of a family real estate business founded by his father, William H. Brown, more than 50 years ago. He is also a co-managing member of the Spring Hill Real Estate Partners, a real estate investment company that sponsors multifamily investment to qualified investors in the western region of the country. Bill strongly believes it is crucial that to be involved in organized real estate as a way to serve the industry and to give back to the communities in which he conducts business. As such, he has served in numerous positions at the local, state, and national levels. At the local level, Bill served as president of Oakland Association of Realtors in 1984 and served on numerous local association committees. He was chosen to chair the successful campaign to fight two rent control initiatives in Oakland, No and E and No and EE. Bill also was selected by then Oakland Mayor Lionel Wilson to serve as the first landlord representative on the City of Oakland's Residential Rent Arbitration Board. At the state level, Bill served in numerous leadership positions at the California Association of Realtors. Those positions include Chairman of Legislative, Real Estate Finance, Local Governmental Relations, and Federal Issues Committees, as well as Chairman of CREPAC and IMPAC. He served on the Executive Committee 6 times. He was President of CER in 2008 and was also honored as Realtor of the Year. At the national level, Bill has been an NER director since 1991. He was the 2004 chairman of the RPAC trustees and has been a liaison twice, in 2005 and 2011. Bill was a 2012 regional vice president for Region 13 and served on the 2013 NER leadership team as vice president. Additionally, he has served on numerous committees, including strategic planning and executive. He is a Golden R, member of the President's Circle, and is a member of RPAC Hall of Fame at the $50,000 level. He was president of NER, one of the largest trade organizations in the world, in 2017. Bill's experience and commitment to the real estate industry has been professionally and personally rewarding. He was CER president during a time of significant economic uncertainty, and his experience gave him the opportunity to work closely with members on issues related to the market, as well as educate and provide tools for them to both survive and thrive. He enjoyed proactively listening to members' issue and working with CER's leadership team collaboratively to find solutions. On a personal level, Bill met his wife, Heather, at one of our real estate meetings. The bond he has with his wife and his son, Cole, and their dog, Athena, is by far the best he's received from his involvement in organized real estate. And so with that, it is my pleasure and an honor to introduce Mr. Bill Brown. Hello, Bill.
Hey, how you doing? I need to shorten that intro, but it's good to be here with you today.
Okay, I tried to shorten it the best I could do, I'm afraid. So just a couple questions I want to ask you. Could you share your journey to leadership, what kind of supports that you got and challenges that you faced?
Okay, so I mean, I got into leadership. I mean, it's truly a dollar and cents issue. 1980 I was an apartment broker, and all of a sudden rent control came out and came up on the ballot in Oakland. So I realized that, this is going to hit my pocketbook if rent control passed, and went down to our local association who was fighting the ordinance and got involved. So, we actually won the first two, Measure E, I think in 80, Measure EE in 82. Mm-hmm. We won those. And so it kind of clicked in my head that, you're involved in the real estate can make a difference in our members' business lives. So that kind of turned me on, it did turn me on, and I got involved. And, I was fortunate enough to be chosen to be Oakland's president, and went on to participate in CAR and NAR. So it's been a great ride.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay. So then what kind of support did you get on the way? How someone who's starting out now, what's the best way to get started in CER, for example, or NAR?
For me, it was the person who really gave me my start in CER was Richard Rosenthal. He appointed me to the Communications Committee in 1986, and once again, I was vice chair of the Communications Committee in 1986, And that was my first leadership position there, and I absolutely loved it. And Richard is a mentor along with a lot of people who's been as Jim Ant, past presidents, Walt McDonald, who just died unfortunately. I mean, these guys really kind of pushed me along, but they also challenged me. I was Walt gave me a challenge when he was president to reduce the meetings from 4 to 3. And it wasn't a lot of fun, but because a lot of our members like seeing each other for 4 years, but at the same time, I think CAR saved I think it was $1.5 million, $2 million a year by eliminating that 4th meeting. And we also got to a point where we were light on some meetings in terms of content, so it was the right thing to do. But we had to separate the personal issues away from the business issues and really do the right thing for our members. So as I said, it wasn't a lot of fun getting hearing all the stories of why people want to see their realtor family 4 times a year and all that. But we were able to get them focused on the issue, and it was a great learning experience for me also. And once again, thanks to Walt McDonald for putting me in that position.
All right. And so, okay, so to step back a little bit, so someone who's already involved in the local association and they're also serving on the state and national level, but they want to go a step further with being in leadership like you were. What's the first step? What should they do to get to that level? Because then it's not, because there's limited position available, and there's there's thousands of realtors vying for limited spots. What can they do to stand out, to kind of get it? Should they find maybe particular mentors that can guide them, or
well, I think
what do you suggest?
First, they need to find a committee or something that they're interested in. They need to learn the relevant subject matter in terms of what's being discussed today. Prepare themselves to get up to the mic and discuss, articulately discuss the issue in front of a crowd, participate in debate, and they'll be recognized by leadership. Because I mean, president-elects and so forth are always looking for people who step up to the mic and make good contributions to a committee, who haven't had a leadership position. Because face it, I mean, we're to the point now where, I mean, people who are, my age, too many of us are around. I mean, we need to start bringing up, those who, 20s, 30s, 40s, to provide future leadership opportunities for, local level and for both, and for CAR and NAR. So, I mean, that's the best way to be recognized. Plus, befriend some leadership types and get them to introduce you to those who are in power now, to get your face in front of them.
Gotcha, great. And so, what would you say? How has being in leadership changed your career as a realtor?
Well, number one, it's given me an opportunity to have some say in my own business, and I mean, I think that's invaluable. We contribute individually, but collectively we make decisions that are supposed to benefit our members as a whole. So I mean, it's helped me an awful lot in terms of that, but also transactionally. I mean, as you mentioned in the intro, I'm a syndicator, and we're doing a deal right now in Boise, Idaho, the hottest apartment market in the nation, that I was able to, we're going to close it, I think, on May 15th. That I got the deal because of someone I met and worked with at NAR. So I mean, there are money-making opportunities available out there. A lot of referral on the residential side. I know for a fact a lot of the NAR directors, CAR directors give referrals to people who they work with and are familiar with from association meetings. So I mean, I think there's a higher level of competency when you start getting into directors at the state and national level, and people want to transact and do business with them. And also, by the way, they're doing the same thing at AREAA. I mean, they are starting to give referrals within AREAA. Moderate to high givers are starting to do referrals amongst themselves. So I mean, I think there's some business opportunities, but really those are secondary. Number one is to make sure that we make a good environment for agents to make money, and also to preserve private property rights.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today about that. We really appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, Janet, you're up.
Oh, thank you, Navlet. I am going to highlight the last business, minority business for this session, and that will be express shipping and postal. Patrick?
We're a postal shipping store. We specialize in shipping through UPS, Federal Express, DHL, USPS. We do fax, scan, copy, email. Postal, we do boxing and shipping. We have packing, shipping supplies. So we do a little bit of everything. We try to be an office away from home for most folks. Also, we have mailboxes for our personal use, as well as mailboxes for business use for the community. For those which we found have become very handy for people during this pandemic who've actually opened new businesses. When the pandemic first occurred and they had shared that we were going to be shut in as far as a community, as the world, as the United States, everybody was locked in at home. But then they started stating what businesses would be recognized as being essential. And then they stated that my business would be one of those that was going to be essential. For me, for my business, we flourished during the pandemic. I'm not sure what the causation was. Like I shared earlier, a lot of people started opening their own businesses, and with that, they needed those services. And then you have people, I imagine, that were just at home. And so they needed to get things done in an expedient manner. And so they start coming through, and then Yelp and then Googling and finding where they didn't necessarily have to go to the post office. They didn't have to go to UPS. They didn't have to go to Federal Express. They needed a fax because now they're speaking to their employer, EDD, or whomever it is, and they need to get documents sent out immediately. And so they found our location. Board of Realtors here in the South Bay, I want to thank them as well for spotlighting businesses here in the Torrance area. It really is nice of them to extend this to us because we do need more exposure as far as small businesses here in the community to let people know that we're here, and they don't necessarily have to go well out their way in order to receive the services that they need, which are right here in their backyards.
Okay, thank you guys for coming. This is not the end. We have a drawing, and I am going to turn that over to Julie.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Janet. We have some books to give out to audience members, especially those of you who have allocated this time and stayed on for the entirety of the event. I have created a little wheel of names. We're going to do a little quick drawing. Kathy, what is the book we're giving out today? Oh, I'm unmuting Kathy. She's going to join us.
Sorry about that. We're giving out a couple of different books.